Hello. General Hospital today will reveal Alexis had never experienced a moment more excruciating, more psychologically paralyzing, than the one that unfolded the night Kai and Trina arrived unannounced at her home. It was late, the world outside her windows dim and silent, but the air inside was thick with something unspoken. A storm barely contained behind trembling lips and tear-glassed eyes. Kai's expression was hollow with guilt. Trina's voice barely steady as she recounted the events of the night that changed everything. They had been there inside Drew's house on the night of the shooting. Not by accident, not with innocent intent. They were in the shadows, trespassing, clinging to fear and curiosity. When they heard the chillingly familiar ringtone Willow's lullaby for Wiley, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," cut through the silence like a blade. It rang out seconds before two gunshots echoed through the house. That lullaby had always symbolized comfort, but now it carried with it the weight of horror. What they had heard, what they now knew, was not speculation. It was not assumption. It was irrefutable. And they carried it like a cross on their backs, burdened with a truth too heavy to bear alone. They chose Alexis, believing she would be the anchor of morality in the chaos, the one person who could carry the weight of that truth with integrity. But they miscalculated the cost of conscience. Alexis sat motionless for a long moment after hearing their account, eyes flickering, heart pounding with a rhythm that felt foreign and violent. Everything inside her twisted her instincts as a lawyer, her role as an advocate, her history with Drew, her love for Scout, and her complicated maternal connection to Willow. She wanted to protect, to reason, to delay, to pretend that maybe it could somehow remain hidden. Her silence wasn't cowardice, but calculation. Because to speak that truth aloud would unleash an avalanche. It would not only devastate Drew and Willow, it would shatter any lingering illusion of control she had over her fractured relationships and emotional allegiances. But nothing could prepare her for what came next. The courtroom was silent, packed with familiar faces, some angry, some anxious, some quietly broken. And then came that moment. That brutal, irreversible moment. Alexis stood, her breath caught in her throat. And then, with the soft clarity of someone choosing justice over loyalty, she declared, "Willow shot Drew." The words rang out with a horrifying finality. No one spoke. No one moved. The room was suspended in stunned stillness. It was as though time itself recoiled from the impact of the truth. Willow leapt from her seat in an instant, her entire body racked with disbelief and dread. Her eyes, wide and glistening, darted between Alexis, Trina, and Kai. She screamed in protest, a mixture of fury and desperation, her voice cracking as she denied the accusation. She insisted Alexis was mistaken, that Kai and Trina were liars, manipulators, enemies looking to destroy her. But the courtroom, once sympathetic to her, had turned. The doubt that had once hovered just out of reach now moved to the foreground. The lullaby, the timeline, the concealed truth that no longer fit the narrative of an accident or Michael's conspiracy. All of it now pointed to her. Drew sat motionless near the front row, his face pale, as though all color had drained from his soul. His lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. His mind raced back to every moment. They had shared every fragile attempt to rebuild what had been broken. Every time he'd chosen to believe her over his own instincts. And now, it all collapsed under the weight of a betrayal he never saw coming. The woman he had once loved, the mother of his child. The person he had defended when others warned him otherwise. She had aimed a gun at him, and pulled the trigger. Twice. The emotional wounds cut deeper than the physical scars ever could. Forgiveness, which he had clung to for so long, evaporated into a hollow void. This was not simply a legal unraveling, it was the emotional disintegration of a man who had believed in the impossible. Drew had always chosen hope, even when it hurt. But now, with each word uttered in court, each denial from Willow laced with panic, each painful glance exchanged, that hope died a quiet, dignified death inside him, and in its place grew something colder, something irreversible. A realization that love, no matter how deeply felt, could not survive the poison of betrayal. However, the nightmare did not end with Alexis's revelation. In fact, it had only just begun. As the investigation deepened and law enforcement scoured the details surrounding the shooting, more damning evidence surfaced, evidence that transformed the case from a solitary act of violence into a far-reaching conspiracy. It became horrifically clear that Willow had not acted alone. The magnitude of the betrayal widened when two names, each carrying significant weight and influence in Port Charles, emerged from the shadows: Valentine Casadini and Everett Sidwell. The courtroom, already teetering on the edge of chaos, descended into stunned silence as the prosecution presented new findings. Text records, deleted surveillance footage recovered from Drew's property, and a mysterious burner phone registered to an offshore account all pointed to coordinated efforts to conceal the truth. Valentine's involvement was the most confounding. Known for his refined demeanor and strategic mind, His loyalty had often shifted in morally gray directions. But this revelation shattered any remaining illusion that he operated within ethical bounds. Speculation quickly erupted. Had he been manipulated emotionally by Willow? Or was this a calculated move to shift the balance of power in Port Charles? Some believed he acted out of desperation. Others suspected a deeper vendetta masked by his calm exterior. Regardless of his motives, the result was the same: he had helped to orchestrate a cover-up of attempted murder. Sidwell's role was no less chilling. Long considered an enigmatic figure lurking at the periphery of many questionable dealings, his name had often been whispered in connection with blackmail, corporate espionage, and manipulation. But this time the proof was undeniable. He had provided Willow with falsified phone records and coached her on how to frame Michael, even going as far as planting fabricated evidence in Michael's private storage unit to divert suspicion. His methods were precise, his detachment disturbing. It was a masterclass in strategic obstruction, and for a time, it had worked. The collective attention had been misdirected, and Michael, already weighed down by familial guilt and lingering tension with Willow, was being groomed as a fall guy for a crime he never committed. The fallout in court was immediate and explosive. Michael, blindsided, sat in stunned disbelief, barely able to process the layers of deception closing in around him. His breath caught in his throat as he realized how close he had come to being wrongfully convicted. How skillfully his trust had been manipulated by people he had allowed into his life. Jacinda, seated beside him, gripped the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. When Sidwell's name was read aloud and his image appeared on the courtroom monitors, she gasped and slumped forward, her body trembling. A nurse had to be summoned to assist her out of the gallery. The betrayal wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. And then there was Trina. Once viewed as an unlikely whistleblower, she had quickly become the center of a maelstrom. While many praised her bravery, others, particularly Willow supporters, cast her as a traitor, a disruptor, someone who had shattered the illusion of the Kane family's unity. Social media erupted. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, holding signs that either demanded justice for Drew or professed Willow's innocence. Inside, the tension was razor-sharp. Trina stood tall, though visibly shaken, beside Kai. Both had made the conscious decision to come clean, not just about what they had witnessed, but about their own mistakes at night. They admitted to breaking into Drew's house, stealing from his safe, and withholding information from authorities. Their admission carried significant legal risk, and yet they made it willingly, offering up their testimony with one clear message: let the truth prevail. That singular act shifted the tone of the trial. The court, once skeptical, now reeled with a mixture of outrage and awe. The courage it took for two young individuals to risk their freedom in pursuit of justice couldn't be ignored. Their voices, shaking but firm, reminded everyone present that justice was not just about punishment, it was about accountability. In that moment, the courtroom transformed from a theater of legal strategy into a battleground of conscience. While the legal team scrambled to adjust their strategies in light of the new revelations, the ripple effect surged far beyond the courthouse walls. Families were torn, alliances fractured, and reputations left in ruin. But beneath it all was a chilling realization: if Valentine and Sidwell were willing to manipulate, forge, and deceive to protect Willow, or perhaps to protect themselves, then how many more layers remained hidden beneath the surface? And more disturbingly, what was Willow truly capable of? Now that her mask had finally fallen, there was no escaping now. After a long, harrowing night spent in custody, stripped of her defiance, isolated in a holding cell, and confronted with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, Willow finally broke. The weight of everything she had done, and everything she had tried to suppress, crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Her hours of solitary confinement were not just physical, but deeply psychological. She had replayed every moment in her mind: the argument with Drew, the gun in her hand, the sound of Wiley's ringtone echoing as her emotions spiraled out of control. Each memory became more unbearable than the last. When dawn broke, she was no longer the same woman who had once stood in front of the court with fiery denial. Something inside her had collapsed, and in that void was nothing but silence, remorse, and the unavoidable reckoning that awaited her. The courtroom the next morning was packed: journalists, family members, citizens of Port Charles, all seated in breathless anticipation. The mood was stark and heavy, as if the entire city had held its breath through the night. Willow entered the room in handcuffs, her once composed exterior now replaced by a fragile stillness. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red from lack of sleep and uncontrollable weeping, her shoulders slightly hunched as though the weight of her choices had become physical. Every step toward the defendant's bench was deliberate, slow, and burdened with the knowledge that this was the moment her fate would be sealed. When asked by the judge how she pleaded to the charges of attempted murder in the first degree, with aggravated circumstances, her voice was barely audible at first. But then it strengthened, trembling not from uncertainty, but from the overwhelming emotions fighting for dominance: shame, fear, and resignation. "Guilty," she said. And with that single word, a decade of facades crumbled. The courtroom was again stunned into silence. But this time the silence was not from disbelief, it was from the collective confrontation with an ugly truth that no one could deny any longer. Tears welled in Willow's eyes as she gave a full confession. She admitted that her actions had been premeditated, driven by an uncontrollable surge of jealousy and the crushing weight of betrayal. She spoke about the emotional isolation she had felt in recent months, the growing distance between her and Drew, and her spiral into paranoia. She confessed that it was not a spontaneous outburst but a calculated response to what she believed was the loss of her place in Drew's life and perhaps her place in the world. She revealed how she had confided in Valentine, who, rather than dissuading her, had enabled her by providing means of manipulating phone data and monitoring Drew's movements. Sidwell, in turn, had coached her on how to deflect suspicion and orchestrate the framing of Michael if things went wrong. It was an elaborate scheme, born from an emotional storm, and fueled by two men who had their own twisted motivations for helping her. The confession was raw, harrowing, and deeply unsettling. When Willow finished speaking, her shoulders slumped as if the act of finally telling the truth had physically drained her. For a brief second, she looked to the gallery, perhaps hoping for a familiar face, a sliver of compassion. But Drew was no longer there. Drew had left the courtroom moments after the guilty plea was entered, wordlessly, without waiting for the rest of the proceedings. He didn't offer a glance back, didn't pause in the doorway. There was nothing left for him in that room, no reconciliation, no justice that could repair what had been broken. For him, the trial had ended the moment he realized the person he had trusted most had looked him in the eye, while harboring the intent to kill him. The Drew who had tried to forgive, who had pleaded for peace, who had once believed in Willow's better nature. That man vanished the moment Alexis spoke the truth. All that remained now was the hollow echo of a man whose entire reality had been rewritten by a bullet and a lie. The judge delivered the sentence swiftly. Willow was convicted of attempted murder in the first degree, with sentencing enhancements due to conspiracy and the involvement of accomplices. The final ruling, a lengthy prison term without the possibility of parole for at least 2 decades. The courtroom gasped, but no protest followed. The verdict felt inevitable. There was no room left for sympathy, only the tragic recognition of a life unraveled. As for Valentine and Sidwell, both were taken into custody within minutes of Willow's sentencing. Law enforcement agents moved quickly, placing both men in handcuffs as murmurs spread through the crowd. Valentine, ever composed, gave no resistance. But there was a flicker of something behind his eyes, something like regret, or perhaps calculation, as if his arrest was only the beginning of a larger, more dangerous game. Sidwell, on the other hand, showed no remorse. His expression remained cold, detached, as if he had already detached himself from the consequences. But his silence didn't fool anyone. The Department of Justice had already prepared warrants for broader investigations, hinting at deep-seated corruption tied to his name. The ripple effects of that day would haunt poor Charles for months, if not years. Willow's conviction was not just a legal outcome, it was an emotional earthquake that cracked the foundations of friendships, families, and entire power structures within the city. For many, it served as a painful reminder that beneath the surface of even the most familiar faces could lie betrayal, manipulation, and devastation. And for Drew, who walked alone out of the courthouse into a world that no longer made sense, it marked the final, irreversible ending to the life he had once dreamed of rebuilding. There was no looking back. There was no going home, only forward through the wreckage. The fallout from Willow's confession and sentencing sent a tremor through the very foundation of Port Charles, as if a curtain had suddenly been yanked back to reveal a much darker truth, long festering beneath the surface. What had initially seemed like a devastating but isolated tragedy, a wife nearly killing her husband quickly, unraveled into something far more insidious, something that touched nearly every corner of the city's social and political structure. The shockwaves didn't stop with the verdict. They spread into boardrooms, homes, and hidden corridors of influence, breaking apart long-standing alliances and turning once trusted friendships into battlegrounds of suspicion and betrayal. What had once been perceived as unshakable loyalties between families, legal teams, corporate figures, and city leaders now began to crumble. Familiar faces who had always stood in unity found themselves questioning each other's motivations, wondering who had known what and for how long. The chaos revealed not only the dangerous reach of those like Sidwell and Valentine, but also the fragility of public trust. Former allies exchanged wary glances across courtrooms and council meetings. Every conversation felt loaded. Every silence spoke volumes. Secrets that had been buried for years now began to claw their way to the surface. Emboldened by the unmasking of Willow and the exposure of the conspiracy surrounding her. And yet, there was a sense that even this was only scratching the surface of a far more elaborate game. Alexis, once hailed as a pillar of moral clarity, found herself caught in a tidal wave of public scrutiny and private doubt. Her decision to come forward and expose Willow had been grounded in her commitment to justice. But the emotional price she paid was staggering. She had not only destroyed the defense she had worked tirelessly to build, she had also shattered her own belief that everyone, no matter how lost, could still be redeemed. For years, Alexis had tried to live by that ideal, seeing herself in those she defended, believing that with enough compassion and guidance, even the most broken souls could be led back to the light. But watching Willow fall apart, listening to the chilling details of the plan she had carried out, and seeing the damage left in her wake, it forced Alexis to confront the painful truth that some people cross a line they can never return from. And in telling the truth, Alexis hadn't just sacrificed her professional strategy. She had surrendered a piece of her heart, the part that still believed in salvation without consequence. The city tried to move on. Public statements were made. Investigations were launched. Valentine and Sidwell's financial ties and social affiliations came under intense scrutiny. Whispers circulated about how deep the corruption ran, about who else might have turned a blind eye or benefited from the chaos. But just when the community began to settle into the illusion of closure, something happened that shattered that fragile calm. Late one night, after the courthouse had emptied and the media frenzy had begun to fade, a plain white envelope was slipped through the door of the district attorney's office. No name, no return address, no markings at all. Inside was a flash drive containing a single audio file. When played, the file revealed a heavily distorted voice, altered through encryption, making identification nearly impossible. The voice was low, deliberate, and haunting. "I only did what he told me to do," the speaker said. Willow was just the first pawn. The silence that followed those words was more terrifying than the message itself. The implication was clear: this wasn't over. Willow had not been the mastermind. She had been used, manipulated, and whoever was pulling the strings was still out there, still watching, still playing. The entire city, from the highest offices of power to the most ordinary homes, was once again plunged into uncertainty. Who was the anonymous voice? Was it Valentine, protecting someone even higher up? Was it Sidwell, recording insurance before his arrest? Or was it someone neither named nor suspected, someone embedded so deeply in the system that they could engineer all of this from the shadows? The questions began to multiply like poison. Had Alexis truly uncovered the heart of the conspiracy? Or had she only exposed the decoy? What if Kai and Trina, in their desperation to seek justice, had unknowingly stepped into a trap far more dangerous than they imagined? What if Drew had been a target not because of personal betrayal but because of what he knew? One thing was certain. Port Charles had not seen the end of the storm. It had merely survived the first wave. Now, as fear began to creep back into everyday life and the hunt for the real mastermind began, the citizens braced themselves for the next move. The game was still in motion. And somewhere, in the shadows, someone was already making the next call.